fellow travelers. Welcome to the 55th level of the RPG Cave. That's a palindrome, folks. I'm one of your hosts, the level 99 human archmage, Ryan Turford, and I am joined for the first time on the show by the level 99 half-elf assassin, Mr. Kevin Ainsworth, the Muffin Mon himself. Kevin, how are you doing on this, lovely Monday evening, good sir?
I'm doing great. Fireworks popping off, celebrating the 4th of July here in the United States. Got a lot of sun this weekend. Really, hopefully it's not coming through. Hopefully I didn't get sunburned, but I'm excited to talk about one of my favorite JRPGs of all time.
Yes, absolutely. First off, Garrett's off for the next 2 weeks, so we had to pull in some guests. And one of the things that we had people fill out about a month ago was a survey. We were asking some questions about the show, but also asking, would you like to be on the show? Would you like to guest on the show? And if so, what games did you want to talk about? And that's why Kevin's here tonight, because, we needed someone to fill in for Garret. And we obviously wanted to talk about some GameCube games, because believe it or not, on the survey, there was multiple people who wanted us to talk about GameCube RPGs specifically. But I thought, what better way to do that than to talk about one of the best RPGs on the GameCube, Tales of Symphonia, which is tonight's game. Of course, I got my copy sitting right here because I like to bring props, Kevin. I don't know if you know this from other shows. I like to do that from time to time.
My brother has our shared copy because we got it when we were teenagers. So I don't have it. He has it as his apartment along with our remaining GameCube games.
Nice. But before we get into all that, of course, we got to clear the dungeon of those pesky mobs. Because, we got to make our way to the raid boss. We got to kill all the trash mobs that are in the way. So, folks at home, if you want to support the show, there's a number of awesome ways to do that. Number one, if you're watching us right now on youtube.com/carpoolgaming, don't forget to hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed already. And ding, 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 ring that bell to be notified about whenever we post new videos or whenever we go live with this live stream right now. Also, let us know in the comments what you think about Tales of Symphonia or just GameCube RPGs in general. What's your favorite? Let us know in the comments below. We would love to hear from you. Also, if you're listening to us on audio feeds, because the RPG Cave is also on podcast feeds, don't forget to hit subscribe there as well, or rate us if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Also, if you want this episode a little bit early or lots of exclusive content over the last week and a half, heading over to Patreon, patreon.com/carpoolgaming is where you find that. Throw a little tip in the old tip jar and out comes content. And then last but not least, if you want a cool Carpool Gaming t-shirt like the one I'm wearing, this is an Xbox Drive t-shirt, I know. But if we have an RPG Cave shirt or other shirts for any of our shows, head over to bit.ly/carpooltpg for some merch. Or the link is in the show notes or the description of this video if you're watching on YouTube. But anyways, with all that out of the way, Kevin, first off, I actually have to ask the important questions before we read from the sacred texts. What are you drinking tonight? Because Garret always likes to point out what he's drinking. Are you drinking anything? Are you staying hydrated in some way?
I only drink water. I am the most boring human being in the world. I maybe have an actual drink like once every year and a half, if that. Water is my go-to. It's basically the only thing I drink all day. So nothing exciting, but will keep me hydrated throughout the show.
That's good enough. I mean, that's better than saying you're drinking coffee at 11 o'clock at night like Garret sometimes does. So it's all good. I mean, I'm also drinking water out of this Captain Marvel pint glass. It's very exciting.
It's healthy. It's good for you. Everybody drink some water.
That's what some people say anyways. But anyways, without further ado, it's time to read from the sacred texts. I do this every time. That's my bit. So we're here to talk about Tales of Symphonia. So I'm going to hit you up with some fun facts. Now, we've already done a Tales of series episode before, but it's always good to dive into individual games here because you're going to hear us talk about lots of stuff about this game in particular that we wouldn't have covered on the Tales episode. And we might be doing this for more Tales episodes down the road. Wink, wink. So stay tuned for that. But anyways, let's do the fun facts as we always do when we highlight a specific game. So, Tales of Symphonia was originally released on August 29th, 2003 in Japan on the GameCube. It was announced to be a GameCube exclusive. In fact, on the box it actually says only on GameCube, even though that's a lie because it came to a bunch of other platforms. In other words, spoiler alert for the rest of the fun facts. But the game came to North America on July 13th, 2004. And I always like to highlight that too because, this was that era where with a lot of JRPGs, we just didn't get them right away in North America. In fact, it was almost a year later that it took for us to get this game in North America. There was also a PS2 port of Tales of Symphonia that came out on September 22nd, 2004, but it was Japan only. So it didn't come to any other territories. It didn't really include much extra content. There was a little bit there, but it wasn't like as much stuff as we saw in like the Tales of Vesperia PS3 port. But there was some reason to double dip, but it wasn't, a huge reason. It was more just a lot of people in Japan just didn't have GameCubes. So that was just the reason why they put it on PlayStation 2.
Shocking decision.
I know. But in fact, that's something we saw with a lot of GameCube Japanese games. Like Resident Evil 4 was in the same boat as well. But also, the game itself received a sequel called Tales of Symphonia Dawn of the New World on the Wii on June 26, 2008 in Japan, and later that year in North America on November 11th. A lot of people don't really love that game. I think we might talk about that one a little bit later, though, because you don't love that game? No?
I hate that game. I consider it an abomination, and I prefer not to acknowledge its existence.
Whoa. I think there's worse Tales games than that game.
I don't. So that's we differ there.
Clearly, you haven't played enough Tales spin-off games, Kevin. But moving on, both games were actually bundled in a collection for the PlayStation 3 called Tales of Symphonia Chronicles, which was released on October 10th, 2013, and the following year in North America on February 25th. This included both Tales of Symphonia 1 and Dawn of the New World as well in one collection. And there was some improvements to that as well, such as they restored the original opening to the game, because one of the things that they had in the North American version of Tales of Symphonia is they had the same intro movie from the Japanese version, but they had this like really generic fantasy theme underneath it. And it looked like really jarring to watch. But the PlayStation 3 collection restores the original opening to the game, which is good, because it's actually a pretty good, catchy kind of J-pop song. But the game eventually got ported to PC on February 2nd, 2016, and then the port was done by Other Ocean Interactive, who handle a lot of PC ports. But I haven't played the PC version, so I don't know how that one plays anyways. But
I have played the PC version.
Ooh, look at you over here.
Yes, I got it as a pre-order bonus for Tales of Berseria, I believe it was. If you hit a certain goal amount, they gave you that before they re-released it to the public. So
yeah,
I was like, I gotta support that. It runs great on my PC.
Yeah, that makes total sense as to why it would be like a pre-order bonus for that game in particular, because that came out in 2017 on PC. So, and then last on the fun facts, Tales of Symphonia was very, very popular when it first came out, and it received multiple manga and adaptations, as well as 2 light novel spin-offs, and the game was the best-selling game in the Tales series at the point that it came out. It's estimated at about 2.4 million copies now, and it's only really been passed by Tales of Arise from last year. So, very, very, very popular game. It was really it turned a lot of people on to this franchise in general. Us included, I think. So that's it for the fun facts. I think there's a lot to dive into, but there's kind of your history lesson on, where this game came from and the multitude of systems you can probably get this on. But we had to talk about our history with the Tales series and also our history with this game. So Kevin, start us off. Was this your first Tales game? And if so, if not, where did you get your start?
This was my first Tales game. My brother and I got it. I don't remember if it was for Christmas or around the holidays, but we actually tried playing this game and got an hour and a half in and didn't like it the first time we tried playing it.
Oh no.
So we were like, what is this? So we put it down for a while and then we picked it back up and something just clicked where we were like, oh, we were being dumb. This game is fantastic. And then we were obsessed with it there on after. So we probably have put over 1,200, 1,500 hours into this game, replayed it dozens of times. Never got the 100%, because you can carry over your stuff with the New Game Plus. I think the closest we got was 98.6%, because the monster book is a pain to get literally everything. Yep. So yeah, this was the first introduction to Tales. But after there, I was pretty obsessed with this series.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, for me, First of all, that's a lot of hours to play one game, Kevin.
No, I
But
love this game.
but it makes sense when you talk about it, how you've played it through it at least 12 times. That kind of adds it up. So, you play it for about 100 hours each playthrough. That's not a lot of time at all, I'm sure. Which is, I'm just so not used to people also playing, games with that many hours.
We've actually done speed runs of this game, and I think the fastest we were able to beat this with me, my brother, and one of our other friends was around 18 hours, where we just blew through the entirety of the game, and that was like, ignoring everything except the main stuff. So it can be beaten quicker than the 80 hours if you are taking your time and actually enjoy. I'd say first playthrough, you're probably in for an 80-hour experience around there.
Well, I remember playing it for the first time, and I think I maybe topped out at 50 to 60 hours. I definitely know it's doable, but it's you're not seeing everything at that point. But I know for my first playthrough, I was I knew about the New Game Plus thing ahead of time. So I knew that I was I don't need to do everything the first time anyways. And a lot of the stuff almost was better to wait till New Game Plus to do, because you were higher level, and it was easier to go back to it when you revisited the game, I found. So that was kind of my strategy there. But yeah, this was also my first Tales game, mainly because, again, I was playing the GameCube at the time. And in fact, at the time that this was out, I had just gotten my original Xbox, but I had my GameCube pretty early on. That was the first console I got from that generation of consoles. I had bought it the day Metroid Prime came out, because everyone knows I'm such a big Metroid fan from other podcasts. So I had to have the GameCube in platinum with my copy of Metroid Prime, hanging out there. But I was really into RPGs, and I wanted to find an RPG to play on the console, and admittedly, there just aren't that many RPGs on the GameCube. There are some, and they're really good, and we're going to talk about those a little bit later, because I know we had some people submit some of their favorite GameCube RPGs a little bit later on in the show. But it was my brother Kyle who had actually found this game at a local EB Games in London, Ontario, where we used to live. And he was playing around with it, and he's like, this game's really good. I think Ryan will actually like this. So what he ended up doing was he's like, hey, Ryan, you got to check this game out. It's really good, and I hadn't heard of it before. So we lent me the game, and I was hooked from the moment, maybe after the first half an hour to 45 minutes, because to your point, Kevin, I think this game gets off to a pretty slow start anyways.
It does.
So it can feel like a bit of a slog at the beginning. But once you get through the beginning portion of the game, I think you're going to be in with this game. And I definitely felt that right away. And I played this game to death. I just couldn't put it down. The first time I played it and was kind of obsessed with it. And it made me seek out the other Tales games, and I realized very quickly, these games are very rare on PlayStation 1, and they're very expensive. So, even then, they're expensive games now, but even back then, they were not, easy to get a hold of. So it was really hard to play the rest of the Tales games, and it wasn't until we got the later Tales games on PlayStation 3 that I really was able to dive more into the series. And then now I have the old PlayStation 1 games, but
it's interesting because a lot of my Tales experience has actually been on PC, because I think I played Symphonia on GameCube, I played Vesperia on the Xbox, and then most of the rest of them have been on PC, because I didn't have a PlayStation, where most of them were going for consoles. They skipped the Xbox. Obviously, Arise has brought it back, which is, I'm so thankful that it's back on in an Xbox platform, because that's where I prefer to play this. I support it over there. Got the 100% in 48 hours. No big deal.
Nice.
But yeah, I really want the older Tales games, as you were mentioning, because they're not really easily accessible, to come to the new PlayStation service, because I think if there's a service that they're going to come to, it's probably that one. So if we can get those in back compat, the PS3 games, the PS2 ones, I would freak out.
Yeah, getting stuff like Tales of Legendia on there, or Tales of Destiny 1 and 2, or just any of those games. I was actually very surprised last year when they did the whole Tales of 25th anniversary celebration, I was very surprised that they didn't announce a collection of some kind of some of the older games, because they were really trying to show the history of the older games by revisiting all the cinematics from the old games. And they had different panels in Japan with a bunch of different programmers and people who actually voice acted in those games. It was really weird that they did all that, but it didn't lead to anything else. Not a collection, not even other media like an anime or something else. So I was actually very
Yeah.
surprised they haven't really revisited those games at all. Like they're stranded on old platforms at this point.
Yeah, and I think if you know the Tales community, remakes and remasters is a big discussion because they are stranded on those old consoles. Like say Legendia is one I never finished. I started, I never got to finish it because I didn't have access to a PlayStation 2. So I like started it and then no, that's all I got. I got a little taste of it. So that's one I would love to see brought forward. If we do remakes, I know like Abyss, Zillia, we can get those brought up to a modern looking console would be phenomenal. But I think Bandai has something in the works with the Tales series, especially after the success of Arise. I'd be really surprised if they don't give us some sort of collection, remake, remaster.
Yeah. Well, and to your point about Abyss, they did remake it. It was on the 3DS though. But,
Yeah.
so it's not exactly what you wanted. It was almost like a monkey paw thing where you're like, give me a Tales of Abyss remake, and the monkey curls its fingers, and you get it on 3DS instead of consoles. But that's a good port of the game. That's actually a really good version of that game. Is the 3DS.
My brother tells me that I wasn't even aware of it for the longest time because after the Wii, like during the Wii, because once the Smash Brawl came out and I was like, this sucks. And then I got rid of my Wii. Nintendo was kind of dead to me for like 10 years until the Switch. So I kind of ignored everything that was going on over there. And he told me, it's like, oh, Tales of Abyss is over here. So I missed that completely.
Yeah.
That's one I haven't got to.
But then what's even crazier beyond, the games that are stranded on old platforms, there's also so many Tales games that just didn't come to North America. Like there's like Tales of Innocence or Tales of Rebirth. There's so many good Tales games that are just Japan only at this point because I've had a chance to play almost all of them thanks to fan translations, but like I would love to even see some of those come back, and it's very weird. Like Tales is one of those series where it's like half of it is here and half of it's in Japan. There's also stuff like Tales of Fantasia where we didn't get the Super Famicom or the PS1 versions of that game, but we got the Game Boy Advance version instead, which was the worst version of that game. So it's like so weird how they rolled some of this stuff out. Or some of the
That's the one I played, and I liked it. I liked Tales of Fantasia for what it was on the GBA.
No, again, it's not terrible, but it's like if you've played the PlayStation 1 version, it's just so much worse than that game. So it's just tougher to go back to. But that's our history with Tales. I think both of us are pretty big Tales fans, but it mostly stemmed from this game because I think that's how, like I said, I think that's how a lot of people got their starts with this series. It's either they got into this one or they got into Tales of Xillia on PlayStation 3. Or they got into Tales of Arise last year. Those are the three most common places I hear people start with this series. But anyways, we should talk about the story in Tales of Symphonia, what we're actually doing in this game. So while I take a sip of water, Kevin, tell me about what you do in this game.
Sure. So no spoilers, just throwing out there in case anyone was worried that we were going to spoil the game. We aren't. You are put in the role of Lloyd Irving, who is like the main protagonist, I'd say, but he goes off with his friend Genus and Colette. Colette is what is known as the Chosen in the world. She is off to set off on a journey of rejuvenation for the land. The land is dying. It's fueled by mana. They need to pump that up and get everything back on track. So she goes off, and along the way, things don't go quite as planned. All right, angels are involved, mana seals. You got to travel the lands, breaking different seals, meeting different opposition to what you're trying to do. There's tons of plot twists along the way. It's so hard to talk about this game without like actually spoiling it because it's like, oh, you mentioned one character and it's like, well, how can you really talk about who they are without telling them what their role is? But
the best part is, Kevin, we actually have a spoiler question at the end of the show that we're gonna touch on too. So get ready for that. But we'll warn everyone when we get to that point. But it won't. I'm saving it till the end.
But I mean, the story really is about. I mean, it's about friendship, as most JRPGs were back in the day. It touches a lot on discrimination. I think is a big factor in this game. Like half elves are in this world where they're discriminated against. They're kind of used as slaves, or humans are used as slaves. There's a lot of discrimination talk in this game. If you've played Tales of Arise, a lot of the themes in Arise are kind of taken from Symphonia. It is I always drew that line when I was playing them. So if you like to Rise or those central themes, I think you're going to find a lot to love here because there are that overlap between the themes of that.
Mhm.
It's about loss, family. Um, I I don't know what else to say without spoiling things, Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to pick it up from here because actually, you touched on first of all some great points there about Tales of Arise borrowing a lot from this. I think actually a lot of Tales games over the years have really borrowed a lot of themes from this game. You've even got stuff like Tales of Grace's F on the PlayStation 3 that heavily borrowed a lot of themes from this game. In fact, more in the spoilery camp than the non-spoilery camp as far as some of those themes are concerned. But you're right. Like even just playing, the intro section again, and then playing through the first like couple hours to kind of refresh myself for this podcast because it's been years since I'd done a full playthrough of Tales of Symphonia. It's very apparent very quickly. Like you're 5 minutes into the game and it starts talking about human enslavement camps that
Yep.
the Desians have. I think that's what they call them.
Hmm.
So it's just like you're in for some rough stuff already with this as far as the story is concerned. But I love that it feels like a mature story. It feels like a grounded story as well. That just feels like it's in a lived-in world, and I just really enjoyed the story as well. Also, to your point, there's a lot of great twists and turns throughout the story, and it always kind of finds a way to keep you on your toes as you play through it as well. Which is part of the reason why there's just so many things we don't want to spoil because there's
Yeah.
so many great moments that happen throughout the story that I whenever I think back about this game, it's hard not to think about them. So
I would say there's a lot of emotional moments, and not even like there are late in the game, but they start pretty early on, specifically with some certain things that happen to characters that you've only briefly known, but you can like kind of tell like, oh, they're a good person, like they have this relationship, and then bad things just happen to them because that's kind of the world that it is unfortunately in this society. And it's like you clearly have, well, I wouldn't even say you clearly have a group that's evil and non-evil, because as you go throughout the story, like the lines kind of get blurred, and like even characters question like, are we doing the right thing, like what's the path we want to take here. So I think it's a great story with a lot of heavy themes. So if you enjoy that kind of storytelling, I would go check this out.
yeah, absolutely. Well, we actually have a question from the audience about the game coming to us from Blaze Knight over on the Discordia, who asked the question: I've personally never played a Tales of game. Are they a single continuity like Mass Effect games are, or are they standalone like most of the Fire Emblem series? Follow-up question: does the answer to the above question improve or detract from the series as a whole, and why? So I thought this was an interesting place to bring this up because, first of all, as we mentioned in the fun facts, this game did have a direct sequel that picks up after the events afterwards, but that's the only other Tales game where the story really matters between games. Like there aren't really even subtle hints and stuff. Like the way the Tales games sort of work and how they feel it like they're in the same line of games is because of its themes, where a lot of times they'll borrow themes from each other or borrow like location types from each other or monster types, things like that. Like it's more of the Final Fantasy type of thing where it's not directly it's not really focused on direct sequels, and when they do direct sequels, they will tell you in the title like
Yeah, it would be two.
it'll give you a 2 there. The only game that they didn't do that with, which I thought was interesting, was Tales of Zestiria and Tales of Berseria, because
Yeah.
Tales of Berseria is a prequel to Tales of Zestiria, but you literally need to know nothing about Tales of Zestiria to have a good time with Berseria anyways. So
Yeah, and I think I was gonna mention that most of the sequels are numbered, so it's pretty much like if you can jump in at any point and you'll be fine to the Tales series. Berseria and Zestiria, like you said, are linked, but if you don't play one or the other, because spoiler alert, I'm not that big of a fan of Zestiria. I think you can probably skip that one.
yeah,
But if you do play it, it gives you like some cool background. Like, oh, that like I see the links. Like it kind of fulfills you more. If you want to slog through that just for that fulfillment, go for it. But Symphonia actually, Ryan, is linked to Fantasia, and I can't spoil how it's linked to Fantasia. But if you finish Symphonia, you'll know how, and then go play Fantasia. You'll understand how those two games are linked. Fantasia is a prequel,
yeah.
so
But
good games.
Yeah. Also, to your point about Zestiria, if you really want to know what happens in that game, you don't even play the game. Just go watch the anime version of it, done by UFO Table, which is actually pretty good. So go watch that
Oh,
instead.
but
But
Kyle corrects me in the chat. Fantasia is a sequel, see, a far distance. That's where I always get confused if it's set way in the future or way
yeah.
in the past.
But
So
again, it's a similar situation with Zestiria and Berseria, where if you
don't even
didn't play the two games, it doesn't even matter. Like don't even worry about it. But it's little things like that are in there too, where if you have played the previous games, it helps, but it doesn't really matter for the most part. But overall, with the story in Symphonia, I think we both agree. Story is great. I think it's well written. I like the fact that there's a lot of English voice acting in the game, but also if you play the PlayStation 3 version, if you want to play with Japanese voices, they did include those for the PlayStation 3 version, which is nice. So you can have whatever audio that you like, which was, and when I say that, it was kind of an oddity for games of that era to have a lot of voice acting like this one, where voice acting was really starting to become more popular around this time. That Tales of the Symphonia leaked out. In fact, it might have been one of the only GameCube RPGs that even had voice acting for the most part. I think Batten Kaitos did too, and maybe Skies of Arcadia did, but beyond that was pretty much it. But
this So you mentioned the voice acting. This is actually one of the only JRPGs that I will actively play in English as opposed to Japanese, which I'm full subbed whenever, especially these days. I don't want the English voice acting. I don't know if it was higher quality back in the day, but like when I still put on, like, load it up on Steam and play Tales of Symphonia, I'm still choosing the English. I'm still going with those English voice actors because I think they do a really good job in this game.
yeah, I definitely think they are as well. And in fact, if you watched a lot of dubbed anime around this time period, a lot of the voice actors you've probably recognized them from other anime shows from like the early 2000s, which is always just something interesting to see. Whereas I'm someone I think that actually more often than not always plays with Japanese voices, but I'm the type of person that will play with whatever I played with first. So Tales of Symphonia, I played it on the GameCube where you didn't have an option, and I liked the voice acting there. So whenever I go back to that game, I'm not tempted to change it to Japanese again. But I'm glad that the option is there for those that prefer Japanese voices. I'm looking at you, Sean Capri, because I know, Sean Capri will only play with Japanese voices if it gives him the option, regardless of what he played before. But that's just who he is. That's who Sean Capri is.
Well, he hated the GameCube. Well, he never had a GameCube, so he's never gonna play this.
That's the weirdest thing. Whenever I listen to Nintendo Drive, and I'm listening to Kato and Sean, whenever a GameCube related story comes up, and I'm like, you guys didn't have GameCubes. What's wrong?
Called him out on it. He's like, what is it with this console? I don't understand.
But it's the new hotness. It's the current hotness. It's like Tales of Symphonia is actually one of the cheaper games on the console at like $50 Canadian. So at this point, because GameCube games are definitely going up in price because it's crazy. Because actually, I saw we actually had a new listener to the show mentioned in the Discord a couple days ago about how they were listening back to one of our old episodes, and they were curious because it was the RPG starter guide episode. We were recommending RPGs for people who are new to RPGs, and they were wondering about why we didn't recommend something like Paper Mario 1,000 Year Door. And I'm like, that game is definitely a good RPG beginner game, but man, that game's expensive. It's like $300 for that game. Like,
Is it really?
yeah, the price of admission is too high on Paper Mario 1,000 Year Door, and I'm like, that's one game that totally needs a remake or like a remaster of some kind, or just any kind of re-release. Just Nintendo put it out on something, and people will flock to it because that's one of the most expensive games on the console, and everything on a console that's already prohibitively expensive for games right now. So there you go. But that's one of the nice things about Tales of Symphonia. If you're into GameCube collecting, or if you're just getting started with it, this is a good place to start because, like I said, the copies are pretty easy to find and they are fairly cheap since it did get so many ports to other consoles. But anyways, let's move on to kind of the gameplay mechanics because we should talk about how this fits into where the Tales series kind of evolved as far as its combat is concerned. And this is more of the traditional old school style Tales of game where it is side scrolling for the most part. You're on kind of a 3D plane, but not really. I
think they called it like multilinear something was their
Yeah.
battle system
They had
name.
some really dumb, very long name for it. that
Yeah.
I can't really remember. But
Basically, you run side to side, but your other character can go around you, like you don't run into each other, right?
yeah, it's not like other Tales games where you will run on the 2D plane and your characters will bump into each other, and you have to like jump over the other characters to get over them. You don't have to do that in this game, but it's not
Hmm.
like it's not at 3D and open like the other Tales games, like the newer Tales games, like something like Tales of Vesperia, even where you had like a
Yeah.
full like 3D battlefield, but it's still mostly played on a 2D plane. Like this one, very it feels like the in between Vesperia and the original Tales games, because the original Tales
Hmm.
games all took place on 2D planes as well as far as their combat was concerned, and they almost feel like fighting games in a lot of ways. Like they have that feel to
They
them.
do. That is a great comparison because Tales has often been described like the combat as a fighting game because you have those chain combo, like you do certain A attacks into a string of special moves. So it is very much a fighting game system. And I feel like if we're talking combat systems, Tales of Symphonias was kind of the precursor to the more modern Tales games
Yeah,
because, as you said, once it went to Vesperia, they were like, okay, we gotta get into a 3D plane. We gotta give people this ability to run in a circle, and then they've kind of evolved since then. Like we saw with Arise, you could run around the entire 3D battlefield. It wasn't this linear motion, and some people that might be a turnoff. The fact that you are stuck on this 2D plane whenever I go back to it, and it might be nostalgia, it doesn't hinder my experience. I still think the combat feels good. You still have the ability to chain those. Uh, you can do Rising Falcon after a few hits, and it is a very good combat system still.
yeah. Like you're mixing and matching your regular attacks with your arts. And it also depends on what character you decide to play as too, because you can play as Lloyd, which is the main character, who he's got two swords and he runs around and he is punching and kicking. But for the most part, you can switch to any of the characters you want. You can play as Rain the healer if you want to, or you can play as Colette throwing chakrams at the enemies at that point. And all the characters play completely differently from each other.
Very different.
Yeah. Like there's a character that can't use his hands, and the way he plays is totally different from the other characters.
Love Regal, one of my favorite to play as. He has sweet, awesome move. Like the animations or his moves are very cool. And then you kind of have like an in between, like Zelos or Kratos, where they have a sword, but they can also use magic. So if you like the combination, there's a whole plethora of play styles here. You can be the mage, you can be the straight up warrior character. It's fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it gives you a fighting style regardless of which one you like, and it gives you a lot of different options. Or likewise, if you don't want to play the whole game as one character, you can switch, mix and match however you want to at that point. Plus, they give you the limited ability to kind of set the parameters ahead of time for what your AI companions will do, such as
Hmm.
when like Rain, for example, the healer, like have her heal one of your allies after you drop down a certain percentage of health. You can configure that in the options, as well as a whole bunch of other stuff as well. So you can play around with it a lot, and you're not like you don't feel handicapped by the fact that you're not controlling all the party members at once.
I think Rain's always been a mainstay in my party. She's a fantastic healer. I think I wrote into the support episode about that. She literally will heal you, dispel all your debuffs. Revitalize is stuck in my brain. The little incantation she says before it. I love it. Love Rain. I will say that one thing we need to touch on when we're talking about combat systems is the X Gem system, Ryan, because this is something we haven't really seen in other Tales games where you kind of choose what type of moves you want. You either go towards an S type or a T type. One S is, I think, striking,
Yeah,
and then T is technical.
yeah,
So if that it changes depending on, you can influence with X gems, which are basically items you can put on. You can combine for special effects like randomly increase your HP after battle and cool things like that. I love the X gem system. I think it's a fantastic system compared to especially some of the newer Tales games. Zestiria, I'm looking at you. I do not like your system you got going on there. But the fact that like you can play through the game multiple times and characters can have different moves. You have like double Demon Fang over on the S side, or like Fierce Demon Fang on the T side. I might have switched those, but you get the point. Like the moves change depending on which way you go. And to get new moves, you have to use the old moves like certain amount of time. So it really encourages you to like try your entire arsenal and figure out like how can I best utilize these. And what I loved about this is you're not limited to like the directions and a button. You can map stuff to like the C stick on the GameCube and have little shortcuts. So you have a plethora of options.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it really, to your point, it really made you try things out. Or likewise, if there was a move you really liked and you want more moves like it, the easiest way to get more moves like the move that you really like is to use that move over as many times as possible. And then you kind of level up in that tree essentially. Like it doesn't give you a giant skill tree that you throw little, like you pop bubbles into to, get certain skills. Like you just learn them as you do them.
And some moves you need to use two, like Zelos for his lightning Tiger Blade. You need to have used Tiger Blade like 50 times and lightning 50 times, and then you get a combination of the skill. It's awesome. I absolutely love it. There's more we can talk about for the combat system, like unison attacks. Over limits are kind of a mainstay in the Tales, right?
Yeah.
Like you take a certain amount of damage, and then eventually like you enter an over limit state, which allows you to do special moves like Mystic Arts. If you play any of the Tales games, that's kind of in there. But Mystic Arts are basically just this fancy like show off super powerful move. But like unison attacks are, you hit the Z button, I believe, and then you get to input a move from every character, and it'll do like a combination attack. And if you do certain moves, you can combine like a Tempest and Photon combined into Photon Tempest. So then you get like Lloyd with Rain's spell around him doing an attack. It's very cool.
It kind of reminded me of Chrono Trigger in a lot of ways, where you've got a lot of combination attacks between your party members, and depending on what party members you bring with you, like you have to also think about that too. Like what unison attacks are going to work with the characters that I have to work with, and is that the right strategy against this particular like boss that I'm coming up against, for example. So there's a lot of strategy that's in the gameplay as well, because you have 8 party members in total by the end of the game, and you only have 4 slots in your party. So you have to mix and match and decide who to go with. Although, again, I feel like both of us probably had Rain and at least Lloyd in our main party for most of the game. So.
And then it depends on, if I'm playing solo, it's Lloyd, Rain, Sheena, and Zelos. If I'm playing with other people, I'll probably drop Sheena out for Genus, because my brother loves Genus, or Persea. Those are his 2 characters.
Nice. Yeah, for me, we had very similar parties. I think you and I had basically the exact same party where Sheena and Zealous were kind of my other 2 characters. Because I rocked with Kratos for a long time and then replaced him with Zenas instead. So yeah, but the combat itself, I think is really fun. Like I think, even though they started to explore the 3D space with something like Vesperia, I actually think the 2D combat was actually more fun, because I think they were able to balance it much better in this game versus what they did in Vesperia, where they were really trying to try something new. And we saw that same thing happen with Systeria as well, because Systeria also was when they tried to make this shift in the combat as well, which is part of the reason why that game kind of falls flat, because of the combat system combined with its weird gameplay mechanics on top of it. It just doesn't feel like a fun experience. So it feels like Symphonia is like the most refined version of what we got from the 2D style combat in the Tales games. And it feels like the perfect balance of this. And then I also think like other games also do it really well, like Legendia as well. And some of the non-North America Tales games as well, like Rebirth, I think has a really good combat system too. But again, combat's great in Tales of Symphonia as well. So I think it's pretty awesome. So overall, I like the story a lot. We like the gameplay a lot. I think now it's time for us to kind of, take an overall kind of look on the game and talk about, number one, how we would rate it against other Tales games, but also like, since we don't get to talk about GameCube very often in the show, I want us to rank it against other GameCube RPGs. So start us off. What Kevin, where do you think it ranks among the other Tales games. I think I kind of know where you stand on this, but I want to hear it from you anyways.
Yeah, yeah. So Tales of Symphonia is my favorite game of all time. So it's obviously my favorite Tales game of all time. If we're comparing it to the other Tales games, my favorites would be, I think, Tales of Symphonia is number one. Tales of Arise, I actually put number two, and that's because it is very similar to Tales of Symphonia. Um, I don't rate Tales of Vesperia as highly as other people. I think it's a good game, but I would say Berseria is actually my third, and then probably Fantasia is fourth, and then I'll put Vesperia as fifth. If we're doing top five, I don't want to list every Tales
Yeah.
game I've ever played, but I'll go with that top
There's
five.
like 20 of them. I don't know if we're gonna
Yeah,
if we're
yeah,
gonna
I'm
go
just
through
like,
all of them because likewise I've played almost every single one of them, and definitely I'll do top five as well. So my top five is interesting. I would say we talked about this last year, but I still stand by my statement that I think Arise is actually my favorite Tales game.
it was close for me, so
It,
I can
it's
I can support that.
Yeah, in fact, there's three in the top running, and they're all very close to each other. Because my second one is Tales of Graces F on the PlayStation 3. I played it for the first time last year and was blown away by that game, especially with its really really punishing difficulty. But I kind of liked that about that game. Like it felt like a really interesting and different Tales game. So definitely got to put that as my number two, and then Symphonia is my third one, and then I'd say Tales of Xillia is my fourth one, and then Berseria is number five for me. So that's kind of my top five because I know like something like Xillia you just haven't had a chance to play it, Kevin, because it's on PlayStation.
Yeah, I was gonna say the two in your top five I haven't been able to play. So
Yeah.
please, Bandai, bring them over, and then maybe my top five can all change. But until then, I'm not ranking the Tales of Symphonia 2 is dead last. If for me, I'll put Tales of Crestoria, the mobile game, above that. All right, I had more fun playing that game.
Well, as far as mainline games from Tales, I'd actually say Tales of Zestiria is a worse game than Tales of Symphonia 2.
Okay.
Especially because I didn't I was in the same camp I think with you with that game until I played it on PlayStation 3, and then I felt better about it. I felt like it. Sure, it's kind of a slap in the face to anyone who liked Tales of Symphonia, but at the same time, it's not terrible. It's not the worst game I've ever played. It's not as bad as I'd given it credit for, but because Zestiria was just real bad. Like I just can't get like I think the story in Zestiria is good, but the gameplay just totally falls apart with that game, which is the problem with it.
I can look past the mediocre gameplay in Zestiria. I can't look past the objectively awful decisions story-wise to get rid of the character I wanted to play and then bring in another character. And there's some in the Tales community, there's some background drama about the story was rewritten, and so like that's why Zestiria is a kind of a mess story-wise. But I'm okay with you ranking Zestiria last. That is not a problem.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, there's not much difference between the two of them. They are both at the bottom, or even something like some of the Tales of the World games that were the portable only Japanese games. Some of them were good, but some of them were real bad. So they would definitely rank towards the bottom. They're like action RPG spin-offs where you play as multiple characters across the Tales series. And again, some of them are really good, and some of them are just not so good. So, and it's part of the reason why most of them didn't come out here. but otherwise, though, did you play a lot of GameCube RPGs, Kevin? Like I know there's a few of them out there, and I know we're gonna get to them in a second. But did you get a chance to check those out?
Yeah, I loved RPGs even in the GameCube day. We already mentioned one that I love is Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. I think that's a fantastic RPG. If we're going for other ones, I actually have never played Baten Kaitos or
Yeah,
that was one that was one I did not get to. I think Pokemon Gale of Darkness completely underrated. Like I wish they did more kind of Pokemon games in that vein. Since we're in a Mega Man mood with the Battle Network collection, Mega Man X Command Mission,
Yep.
phenomenal. Where is the re-release of that, Capcom? Throw that, like, give me that. That game is phenomenal.
I'm actually very surprised that didn't come in the X collection. Like after they announced it, I'm like, you have every other X game in here except for that one and the PSP remake of X, which we don't really count. We don't need that one. But
And before I wrap it up, the the big JRPG that I played on GameCube besides Tales of Symphonia, Phantasy Star Online Episode 1 and 2.
Mhm.
Thousands of hours, love that, grinded my butt off in that. I actually liked Episode 3 as well, which was the card-based battle system. I know that's controversial if anyone played Phantasy Star, but I love all three of those games.
Nice, nice. Yeah, for me, on GameCube, again, at the time, Tales of Symphonia was one of the only ones I played, but I've gone back and played pretty much most of the RPGs on GameCube at this point. I've played Baten Kaitos, but I've never finished those games, like either Origins or the original game. And I've played Lost Worlds, and I think that game is pretty good. And I like Paper Mario a lot. Thousand Year Door is number one. That's the best Mario RPG, I think. Like everyone talks about Mario RPG, Legend of the Seven Stars on Super Nintendo, but I think Thousand Year Door is a much better game than that game. Which says a lot because I also think that game is really good too. But yeah, and then Tales of Symphonia, and that's pretty much all the RPGs on GameCube besides Skies of Arcadia, which I've just never played because it's so dang expensive because it's so rare. Like that especially the GameCube version in particular. That one's like, I would be very surprised in 5 years that game is at $1,000 at some point.
I don't even know if I know what that game is, to be honest with you. That's not one I've played either.
So it originally was on Dreamcast, and it's a game about sky pirates in like a steampunk kind of future. The combat itself looks really fun. It's apparently got a really good story, but I just wasn't really into pirates, as everyone knows, at the time it came out. So even though I saw it on store shelves and I should have bought it, like 10 copies of it, I didn't. And now I want to get back to eventually play it again, but it's definitely out of my price range at this
Here's
point.
one going for $365.
That's a lot of money, Kevin. That could buy me so many more games. That could buy me like 10 copies of Tales of Symphonia on GameCube. But that's what I mean, though. It's stuff like that again just puts it out of the price range. Maybe eventually, like if I find like a good auction price at some point, maybe that's something I look into at some point. Because I mean, I think on this show we gotta talk about Skies of Arcadia at some point, or else people will just kick us off the show. They will revoke our license to do an RPG podcast at some point if we don't.
Is there a big fan base for Skies of Arcadia? Because this is literally the first I've ever heard of this game.
There is actually believe it or not, there's actually a really big thing, and we're gonna get to that in questions here. But yeah, so as far as GameCube RPGs, do you think, to the point of the thumbnail on this episode, Kevin, do you think that Tales of Symphonia is the king of GameCube RPGs? Is it the best of the best, do you think?
I think easily it's the best of the best. I don't. There's plenty of good games on the GameCube, despite what some people in carpool gaming might think. But yeah, I say it's the best for sure, hands down.
Yeah, for me, yeah, I would say it is. I think plainly and simply it is. I will say, and we got a question about this from Awesome Dave. Have either of you played the PlayStation 3 version? If so, how does either or both versions hold up today? And I definitely think the PlayStation 3 version is better. They've cleaned up some of the visuals and the gameplay is a little bit better. The addition of Japanese voices as well as some extra content, I do think makes that version better than the GameCube version. But does that really change about where I rank it among other GameCube RPGs? No, it doesn't. I still think it's still the GOAT of GameCube RPGs. Close second would be Paper Mario for me, I think. Thousand Year Door. And then Lost Worlds, I think, would be number 3. And then I'd probably put Baten Kaitos behind that. And again, I just haven't played Skies of Arcadia, so I can't really throw it in.
Yeah, I haven't played the PS3 version. I've played the Steam version and the GameCube version. The Steam version runs flawlessly, basically on any PC. Even on my old PC, it was rocking like a 760 graphics card. Like you can run this game 60 frames per second. Like it completely fine. Like it's not a technically intensive game. I do remember people saying the PlayStation 3 version didn't run at 60 frames compared to the GameCube version. So I don't know if that is like accurate. Maybe
yeah, that
you can
is
talk to
accurate, but it didn't. When I replayed it there, it just didn't really bug me that much. Like I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say if you don't care about the 60 FPS for a game this old, 20 years or whatever, PS3 is probably a good shout, especially because you can get the bundle with the sequel if you want to try that out and make your own mind for that. plus the additional content it comes with, and you get all the mystic arts. Every character has a mystic art in the PS3 version, as opposed to just 3 characters in the GameCube version.
Yeah, and actually, I'm fairly certain the PC version is just the same as the PS3 version of Tales of Symphonia. So
I think, yeah, content wise, it is
yeah, so I think you can't go wrong with either one. In fact, actually, PC might be better because
Easier.
most people don't have
Easier to get
PlayStation
to.
3s today. I mean, unless it comes to
good shout.
PlayStation Plus at some point, because this is the type of game too that I think will actually probably play okay with game streaming. Like, I don't think it'll be that bad too.
I agree. I will say if you get it on PlayStation, well, really, if you get it anywhere and want the achievements or trophies, if you care about that, you're in for a long haul. I think this is a minimum like 4 playthroughs. If you do like a guide, this is not an easy 100% completion. So keep that in mind. Maybe just play it for the story and
but
don't worry
Kevin,
about that.
the PS3 version, it shares its trophies with Tales of Symphonia 2. So in order to get the platinum, you technically have to play the sequel in order to get it.
Does it really?
It's considered one game. It's one collection.
Oh no. Oh my word.
So you're forced into it at that point. You're like, well, I guess I'm playing both of these games now. Because that's just your life. But you're right. The platinum trophy is ridiculous for that game. Like, and it is for all the Tales games for the
Except the Rise.
areas. No, but from that era.
From that era, yeah.
From PlayStation 3, like even Tales of Grace's F, for example, that's like a 200 to 300 hour platinum trophy. And Tales of Xillia and Xillia 2 are the same way too. So
they don't make them like that anymore, Ryan.
Yeah, just play through the game 4 times, and you have to 100% it 3 of the 4 times, and it's just like, get out of here with that. It's too much. But anyways, I want to bring in some of our community members as well, because they had some thoughts about some stuff, and we've only got 2 people who responded about some GameCube stuff. Although we do have the spoiler question as well that we're gonna touch on in just a second. So first off, Brian Eck mostly just had a statement for us. He was mentioning GameCube is so underrated. There are so many great JRPGs and games on it. Recently, I just finished Skies of Arcadia and really enjoyed it. And in fact, he's in the chat and also mentioned again, Skies of Arcadia is a really great game. Highly recommended if only it wasn't so expensive. Although at this point, I'm like, maybe the Dreamcast version is actually cheaper. Maybe that's the route I go for that game. At that point, I'd have to play it on Dreamcast, but it'd be fine.
There's lots of great games on the GameCube. That's completely underrated. It's still one of my favorite, if not my favorite console. I love the GameCube. So Custom Robo was fantastic. Like it had Smash Melee, obviously Double Dash. Even obviously the big names are there, but there's a lot of good games.
Yeah, exactly. And then we got Nagachaka, who gave us some GameCube suggestions, but then also asked us their spoiler-related question, which, again, I'll get to in a second. I'll mention when we're going to spoilers, but let's read off the first half of this. He says, Tales of Symphonia is definitely a top-tier JRPG from the GameCube and alongside Baten Kaido's Eternal Wings and Lost Ocean and the prequel Baten Kaido's Origins. But now, Kevin, I think it's time for us to answer his spoilerific question. So if you don't want to hear spoilers for Tales of Symphonia, skip ahead or mute the stream. And also, I noticed your brother also mentioned in chat a spoiler question, so we might answer that one too. But Nagachaka asks, who was a better father to Lloyd, Kratos or Dirk? Kevin, what do you think about this?
I mean, I think Dirk was probably a better actual father. I do think when it came down to it, Kratos showed up because obviously he secretly betrays his longtime friend in Mythos and helps them get the Eternal Sword and reunite the worlds. And obviously, depending on what path you can choose, his fate differs at the end of it. But I think, long run, Kratos does what he can to try to make amends, but he did, abandon his child. That kind of drops the ball immediately for any Father of the Year awards.
Yeah, that's why I'm 100% is definitely Dirk for me. I think that, especially because I think, I kind of grew up in a similar situation to Lloyd in certain ways when it comes to, my dad. And I really feel for his relationship with Dirk, because that's kind of the relationship I had with my grandfather, who mostly raised me when I was growing up. So I think definitely Dirk probably fits more of the Father of the Year award than Kratos did. But not to sell Kratos short, because you definitely tell that he loves Lloyd. And he does a lot for him anyways. But yeah, I actually think I think that answers that question. But then I also want to answer it's Kyle's question in the chat, who asks, he wants to know the burning question with his Sheena or Colette. Who do you make Lloyd end up with? That's the real question. So who do you make the choose who do you choose at the end, Kevin, for Lloyd's?
Sheena.
Yeah.
Sheena, 100%. I don't like Colette, to be honest with you. I think she's annoying. She never makes it into my party. I don't like playing as her. There's like a few like in-game things like to get titles where you have to play her, and that is like painful. I do not enjoy Colette at all. She's obviously the catalyst for most of the story, like. But it's Sheena. Sheena's a fantastic character. She has a lot of, emotional baggage that she deals with throughout the game, and that resonates a lot more with me than Colette's character. So I always choose Sheena.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're like the same person, because I actually agree with you 100%. Sheena's the best I mean, she's a ninja. Like, come on. Am I not going to choose the ninja as the love interest? Please. Of course I'm going to. Every single time. 110%. Never mind everything else that you said about Colette is totally true and accurate. But anyways, I think that's it. So final thoughts on Tales of Symphonia. I think we both agree it's an amazing game. Now that spoilers are over and you're back now, and I've actually put time codes in the description of this video or on podcast feeds for spoilers. Now that you're back, what do we think overall, Kevin? We think people should go play this?
Yeah, 100%. It's actually one of the more accessible old Tales games because it is on Steam. It's constantly on sale for like $5-10. So
I think it was literally on sale over the weekend for $3. I saw on Twitter.
Yeah, a lot of the Tales, Berseria and Zestiria and Symphonia are always on sale on Steam. So like if you want one of the older, not even like some of them are more new, but if you want any of those, go pick them up for cheap on Steam. And then obviously Arise is getting sales now. I think people were picking it up for like $20 recently, a few sales. So yeah, 100% play Symphonia. I would say if you're new to the Tales series, maybe start there and then go forward, because it might be harder for you to go back if you play Arise first. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like if you didn't play it at the time, it is harder to recommend versus something like Tales of Arise, where I do think it is much more open to new players. Like that's one that we even got Sean Capri to finish at this point. I mean, Sean likes RPGs, but it's definitely one that I feel like is much more open to even just non-RPG fans. So it's definitely the one that, like, Tales of Arise is probably the one I would say to start with. But to your point, if you ever have interest in going back to the Tales games and playing the older ones, then yeah, you're going to want to start with this rather than Arise. Or maybe you play Arise and you're like, I want to play more. This is where I would go next, is what I would suggest. Mm-hmm. Rather than playing some of the more modern ones. And then work your way up from there anyways. Or just get yourself a PlayStation 3, because there's lots of great options on there as well. Even though not everyone loves the PS3, it's actually a great option for Tales games, because there's so many of them on that console and they're all great. So anyways, we're going to wrap up this conversation. But before we go, Kevin, first of all, thank you so much again for filling in tonight for Garret. You did an amazing job. Where can people find you on the internet? Because we need to know where can we find the Muffin Mon?
You can find me at the Muffin Mon on Twitter. That's a 1 instead of an I and an O instead of an A. Currently, follow us at Project X Talk over on Twitter, and you can search Project X Talk on YouTube. We have a big announcement going live tomorrow, July 5th. If you're listening to this on July 5th, then it's noon Eastern time today. Come on over. We have a big announcement. Things are going to look very different for us. We got some things going on, and we hope that you're excited for that. And I just want to acknowledge the chat where Kyle wants me to recite a Dwarven vow number 7, which I believe is love and justice, or justice and love will always win, is Dwarven vow number 7.
Very nice. Well, color me intrigued, Kevin. I mean, I actually don't know what's happening tomorrow, and I can't wait to find out more from y'all over on Project X Talk. As for me, find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. You can also find Dr. Garret Bland over at Bland Explosion over on Twitter as well. You can find us on Twitter at Carpool Gaming, on YouTube at youtube.com/Carpool Gaming, and on podcast services around the globe. So, for Kevin Ainsworth, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been level 55 of the RPG Cave, and we're out.
Bye.